It was November 18th, 2019, and the first episode of the EntreMD Podcast had just gone live. I was a little nervous about it because, this was me putting myself out there in a way I haven't put myself out before, owning the message of, oh my goodness, physician entrepreneurs. This is entrepreneurship is something that is possible for us. We don't have to deal with the burnouts. We don't have to deal with the loss of autonomy. We can build businesses. We can be great at businesses. And I was announcing it to the whole world.
Hi everybody, my name is Dr. Una, and for those of you who don't know me, I am the CEO of Ivy League Pediatrics, and I believe that physicians should be leaders in the healthcare industry. They should have multiple streams of income, and they should be influencers. Your MD is no longer enough. Just being a doctor is no longer enough. It's time to upgrade, okay?
So this was October 2019, and at this point, I had been doing a ton of videos. I thought of myself as the queen of YouTube. And one day I went into my Facebook group with, over 1,000 physicians, and I said, how do you like to consume content? And I just asked that question to prove what I already knew, which is everybody wanted to, watch YouTube videos. And I said, how do you like to consume your content? Is it YouTube? Is it a podcast? Is it a blog? And at this time, to put it in context, I did not listen to podcasts. I did not really read blogs. I was all about videos. And to my shock, over 90% of the people said podcast. And initially I was a little annoyed. I was like, how dare you guys? I've been making all these videos for you for years, and you're telling me you like some other way? So I literally had to go to Google, how to start a podcast, and started looking at information like what kind of mic to use, what kind of platform to use, and all of that. And, I realized that I have a message that has to get out there to physicians. And if this is the way they like to consume content, then it is what it is. And so I made this discovery in October. I, went to be a guest. This was my first time ever being a guest on somebody's podcast in October. And then November, I said, okay, we're going to go all in and we're going to start a podcast.
She would always give us all types of knowledge and vision and all of that. And then she was just had a thought process, let me do a podcast. And so she did it. And I think she recorded like the first season within like a week, and just didn't care about the technical stuff and all that other stuff that can hold you back. And she just went and did it. And I just recall her saying, guys, I did it. I did a thing. I launched the podcast. And I do remember going and listening to it. And it was really nice because to and from work, she did a good job of keeping them between 20 and 30 minutes. So that's my commute. And I got to listen to Dr. Una to and from work.
I would love to tell you that, I thought of some, really high powered mics and, I had figured it all out. But in typical EntreMD, Dr. Una fashion, I was like, we take action. That's what we do. And so I used my cell phone. That was where I recorded the podcast. I used the earphones that come with the cell phone. Then that's what I used as, my mic and my speakers and all of that. Went to the basement in my house and recorded the first episode of the podcast. I did not have an editor. I did not realize how to do it. I walked up to my brother. I said, here, edit it. He's like, I don't know how to edit podcasts. I said, yes, and I'm a physician. If I could figure out business and I could figure out how to record an episode, you are going to edit the episode. And so literally that was the very first episode of the EntreMD Podcast. But I will tell you this, that episode has been listened to over 6,000 times. Tons of people have walked up to me and told me how influential that was in their journey as physician entrepreneurs. And so I'm really grateful that I started it. Now we're 450 episodes out, but that's how episode 1 started.
I started listening to EntreMD Podcast, and that was several years ago. And I have been a fanatic, listening pretty much every single one that comes out since then. I think the biggest impact for me has been the focus on mindset. And that's something that I didn't think I really needed to focus on before listening to her podcast. And what I've realized is that's the most important thing to focus on, and how writing down my goals, not just once a year in January, but doing 90-day sprints and having New Year's 4 times a year, that's something really valuable I've gained from Dr. Una, and also just journaling and writing down those goals really every single day to keep them first and foremost. And the focus on mindset has been really valuable to me.
I subscribed to the podcast, and actually prior to that, I wasn't really a podcast listener, to be honest with you. And so I listened to a podcast, I listened to it when I started to binge on it. And there was one that really struck me, the one that was entitled Dear Employed Physician. And I listened to that one more than once. And it really spoke to me. But why? Because I'm a employed physician, I'm an entrepreneur. And that was the first time I actually had heard about that term, actually, entrepreneur. And so it spoke to me, a lot of things she shared. And I started to learn about, as an entrepreneur, I'm a business. So even though I work for a business, I work for a major hospital, but I am myself, I'm a business. And so I started to treat my day and my the way I saw myself as a personal brand, as a business.
I think that my very first memories are the memories of, doctors during the pandemic. And a number of times people would, reach out to me, send a private message, or if I'm hosting a workshop, they would raise their hands and they're like, Dr. Una, during the pandemic, I was in such a dark, dark, dark place. And the thing that got me through the pandemic was your voice on the podcast, was you telling me, showing me the way out, was you telling me that I can change my circumstances, I can change my work environment, I can change my business. I heard that time and time again. I heard some other doctors who, they're veterans. They've been running private practices, for instance, for over a decade. And they're like, the only reason why my private practice, my business survived the pandemic was because of your podcast. And this could be a year later, they're telling me this. And it's just powerful, what happens with the podcast. Starting off my journey as a socially awkward, super shy, introverted introvert. And a lot of introverts are like, hang on. So you mean I can be a great speaker, I can dominate on stage, I can network, I can be an entrepreneur, I could do these things as an introvert? And so many people have gone on to be speakers, to be guests on podcasts, to start their own podcasts, start their own YouTube channels. And when I would see them on social media, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. They're like, your podcast was the inspiration for starting that. It's fun sometimes when I go for events and, people walk up and they're like, are you Dr. Una? And I'm like, it depends on who's asking. They're like, I listen to the podcast. Like I would recognize that voice anywhere. And, and then people who listen to the podcast find themselves in these events. And they're like, we're EntreMDs. It's super cool to see. After I think about it, a year in, we launched a Facebook group. And a lot of the people who are listeners in the podcast would be a part of the Facebook group. And it gives us this opportunity to just, ask questions around podcast episodes that we've heard. It gives opportunity to take action on the concepts that we've learned from the podcast. And really, a lot of the episodes come from that group, because I don't, record the podcast to just record it. I record it for it to be a solution to the physicians in the community. And so, sometimes I'd go there, I'm like, okay, if you could sit with me for coffee and you could only ask me one question, what would you ask? And then whatever they post in the comments, that ends up, being episodes that we go on to create.
A lot of times, unbeknownst to us, she's getting our questions and our concerns to put them together for the podcast. So I do recall that she did put a question up that asked, what questions would you have? And I probably do remember dropping 2 or 3 comments and saying, hey, I'd like to learn about this. I'd like to learn about being an entrepreneur, or how does marketing work, or how does this business work, and asking those questions. I do remember that post.
I'm so proud of everyone who's a part of the community, because they take the actions, they're creating the results, they're kind of rebelling against the status quo. And because of that, there are vision boards for physicians everywhere showing them that, yeah, we can have an alternate reality. We can build dominant businesses. We can have great teams. We can have time off and it's not a taboo. We can make money and it's not a bad thing. We serve and earn. That's what we do. And so, when you serve, the reward is you earn. That's kind of the way it rolls. So it's been a really fun thing, and I'm so honored to be a part of that community.
This podcast has really made a difference in me not feeling like stuck, so to speak. I knew there was more. I want to do more. I want to experience more. I want to continue to grow. And the podcast really started to get my mind prepared for what the possibilities are as a physician, as an entrepreneur, and in fact, how to build a brand. That I thought branding was only for like products or services in the marketplace. But myself as a personal brand, us as personal brands, that was a whole new concept for me. And so what does that mean? Learning social media, learning how to optimize speaking. Those were the skill sets that I really wanted to gain now that I listened to the podcast that I wasn't fully aware of, and I wasn't fully, I didn't know how much of an impact it would make in my career and in my personal life.
Before the podcast, I just had a thought and a feeling of hopelessness, of moral injury and burnout from coming into medicine for one thing and then it actually being another thing. So what was reality and what was expectation was very far. They were distanced from each other. And so she brought together that there is hope. We don't need to be trying to practice medicine and taking it back to the good old days. We need to actually cultivate and actually be on the forefront of what the future holds.
Now, as you know, the physician community is really in a crisis of sorts, right? You think about burnout being at an all-time high. Think about doctors losing autonomy. Think about how devalued we are in the healthcare space. You think about the financial instability, and the truth of the matter is, no one is really coming to save us. Nobody's coming to make this turn around. Nobody's coming to change this,
We are heading into uncharted territory. There's a lot of questionable things. There's a lot of moral injury and burnout, and it doesn't have to be that way. If you think that we can shift things and we can stay ahead of the curve, the podcast is that. It's basically speaking life and goodness into you to keep your mind strong, to keep it happy, to keep you resilient for what's about to happen.
Definitely no secret that physicians are struggling nowadays. There's high rates of burnout, and private practices are struggling. And I love my private practice. I love my patients, and I love serving, and I love what I do. But it is challenging. And when I hear Dr. Una talk about how private practice is not dead and how she is such an advocate for physicians, it's really empowering. And I hear and see how she has done it with her pediatric practice. And it has really just given me a lot of ideas for how to really make my practice impactful and successful.
When I started the podcast, I was really thinking, if we're going to change the narrative for physicians everywhere, that's going to be a movement. And I started studying movements and found out if you can create a shift in the thinking of 10% of a community, then you can really shift the whole community. And I remember searching it, when I first started the podcast, there were 800,000 licensed physicians in the United States. And I started thinking, I said, so 10% of that is 80,000 people. And if I can help 80,000 people, if I can get this message out to them that entrepreneurship is the way out. Entrepreneurship is the way of taking back control, is the way of ending burnout, is the way of controlling your own financial future, is your way of controlling your career. If I could get that out, then we can shift the whole narrative and we can change the story. So they talk about, bad deals being doctor deals, or doctors are not good at business and all of that, and we live burnt out and that's just the way it is. But we can change all of that with one podcast.
She is 1,000% committed to the physician community. I've not met one person who's as committed as she is, that every day she is really looking for us to win. And for me, what does that look like? How to be a better negotiator, speaking, how to create a favorable work environment, how to be productive so that you can have that balanced schedule. And so for me as an entrepreneur, living my best work life and my best dream life. So I get that day where I can balance taking care of my family, taking care of my kids, spending more time with my wife. These are things that really are, that Dr. Una has really inspired and mentored us as both through the podcast and obviously through the EntreMD Business School.
I realized it was time to call the physician community to hire. And so I started talking about building profitable businesses so you have the freedom to live life and practice medicine on your terms. So started leaning more on, selling, marketing, building a dominant brand, all of those things. And it's amazing, doctors are crossing the 6-figure mark, 7-figure mark, multiple 7-figure mark, kind of normalizing that. And then, there's a lot of conversation around, well, I'm doing this and I've replaced my physician's salary, as if that was an imaginary cap of sorts. And I said, okay, we can push higher one more time. And we started really pushing, like, you can build $1 million business. You can, build a business that brings in 7 figures. And we started having episodes around that. I started sharing my journey, like the top mistakes I made on the way to my first million, the framework of $1 million business, and all of those things. And so we started talking about helping doctors build profitable 7 and multiple 7-figure businesses so they have the freedom to live life and practice medicine on their terms. And it's been so amazing to watch doctors crush this, And then at this stage, really, I think I'm closer to where I've always wanted to be, which is to really let doctors know you can become an entrepreneur, you can build a profitable business, you can take it to 7 or multiple 7 figures if that's what you want to do. And you can also build a business that is really a business asset. It's not your job. It's almost like you're building a system, and this system can work without you. But it starts with this concept of building these teams that can run the businesses. And so we started doing a lot of focus on, teams, how to hire, how to fire, how to build company culture, how to train up, leaders in your organizations and things like that. And so the podcast has shifted in its focus, if you will, and it's not a true shift. It's more like an evolution, but it has evolved to continue to serve doctors in the higher and higher capacities they need to be served at.
I love how Dr. Una really values not just having a successful business and driving ourselves to want more and more professionally, but also to have a really successful family life. And she has 4 kids. She wears so many hats. So I feel like if she can do it, I can do it. But I love the balance and the focus that we're not just doing this to have a bigger business, just to have a bigger business. We're doing this to gain time with our families and freedom. And I love how she gives a lot of tips and pearls on how to achieve that.
If you love the podcast, now you want to take some time and be very grateful to my family who supported me along this journey. I do a lot of work from home. My kids are homeschooled, and so you can imagine 4 children needing to be quiet for me to create these episodes. And it's really fun because they're so into it. I would go like, okay, mommy's recording. And they're like, do you need radio silence, which means it's a podcast? Or do you just need us to be kind of quiet, which means it's a call? I'm like, radio silence. They're like, okay. And I try to get them involved. Usually my older 2, they're 16 and 14. When I need to record, I'm like, go set me up for a podcast, so they'll get me up on Riverside and turn up the mics and do all of that, test everything, make sure I have good lighting. They would do that. Sometimes when I have ads that need to run on the podcast, either for an event or the EntreMD Business School is open for enrollment, you would hear sometimes that it's my kids that will record those as well. And so it's been such a great opportunity to get them to be part of the mission of helping physicians, getting their hands wet as far as all things business. And I'm very grateful that I get to do it with them.
And so having the EntreMD podcast basically brings hope where there is hopelessness for the physician community. And then it allows you to have access to the other EntreMDers. And then all of us, we think with positivity, we think with happiness, we think, wow, the future is bright. And when you're around other physicians that think that way, it helps you, it rubs off on them and helps them think that way too.
This is the legacy I want the EntreMD podcast to leave. I want it to go down in history as the podcast that helped 100,000 physicians, 100,000. And helped them walk away from this whole narrative of loss of autonomy and burnout and, going out of business and, not having a life, and really being the reason why there are doctors who have profitable businesses, who have businesses that are doing $1 million in revenue, multiple 7 figures in revenue. And they've built that dream business and their dream lives. They have time off for the things that matter to them. They're able to pursue projects and passions that are important to them. And they're able to do all of that in a profitable way. I know that when we touch the 100,000, we will completely disrupt the physician space, completely rewrite the narrative where what we experience right now will be a theme of the past. I want the legacy to be that it triggered the movements that made that possible. If you're a physician watching this video and you haven't heard about the EntreMD podcast, let's just say I made this video just for you, okay? I'm Dr. Una. I am the founder of EntreMD, the founder of the EntreMD Business School, the only school of its kind for physician entrepreneurs who want to live life and practice medicine on their terms. Our company, EntreMD, has been featured on the Inc. 5000 list of fastest growing companies 2 years in a row. We have written books for physician entrepreneurs. 4 of them are bestsellers. And I am the host of the Top 1% podcast, the EntreMD Podcast, which is the free MBA for physicians everywhere. This is the business education that you never got after 10 years of a medical education. This is the thing that will put you in the position to become the physician entrepreneur you can be, where you become confident. You can confidently build a business. You can confidently lead a great team. You can confidently have conversations about money without feeling guilt and shame and all of that. Like, this is something you want to subscribe to now. Now, you may be watching and you're like, I know about the EntreMD podcast, but maybe it's not part of your routine. I want to invite you to show up in class every week. Every single week, we have a brand new episode for you. It's no fluff. It is no fillers. It is not a long sales pitch. It is designed to help you become a business owner who builds profitable businesses, who is building their dream business and their dream life at the same time. So this is my invitation for you to subscribe and for you to make this part of what you do. Now, you may be watching and you're like, it's part of my routine. I listen every single week and it's been such a game changer. I want you to be a part of the movement. I want you to take the link of the podcast and share it with the doctors in your world, the associations you're a part of, and tell them, hey, we did not get a business education, but now we can, and we can get it for free. Now, that's pretty important, but the most important part is I'm 1,000% committed to your success.